You found it. Your home for the best content on your favorite team, the Fighting Tigers of LSU. Do us a favor. Subscribe to the channel. Leave your comments below. And be sure to smash that like button.
Well, Jacobian, was a very technically sound, physically strong football player. So you know what you're losing from that standpoint, but we know what he wasn't as well. And he wasn't a dynamic pass rusher, and he would be the first to tell you. But you're losing a very strong inside presence, to your defense. And so you've got to look at, who can make up for that.
Brian Kelly, at virtually every media available this week, has talked extensively about the defensive tackle spot after the injury to Jacobian Guillory, your best, most veteran defensive tackle at a position where you were already thin with respect to skins on the wall. So how do they make it up? A guy who certainly is well equipped to talk about this, former LSU defensive tackle, former number 18, great friend of the show, also works now with our friends over at Mockler Beverage, so drink plenty of ice cold Bud Light. Christian LaCouture, how are you, dude?
What's up, my man? Selling the best beers in the world. How you doing?
I love it, dude. It's so good. Guys, proudly repping the brand always, man.
Love it.
Hey, let me first just start. So you, I know you were on staff at LSU. Everybody knows that. So you still got a close connection to the staff and to the program. When you saw the news about Jacobian Guillory, what was your first? I mean, you're also a guy who had an ACL. You had a season-ending injury. What was your first reaction when you saw that news?
Yeah, man, it was obviously tough, watching his film and recruiting. I mean, he was the guy that, would take on double teams, split them, and get off the block and make plays. For him, maybe not the most dynamic pass rusher, but could still provide that push in the middle. And losing that guy, especially with that experience he had, man, it's obviously tough with a thin position. Yeah.
Hey, I'm glad you brought up maybe not being a dynamic pass rusher, because when you look at Jacobian's stats, through 2 games he had 1 tackle. And Brian Kelly's even alluded to this before, where he's not necessarily the guy that you're going to see stuff the stat sheet, but he impacts the game in so many other ways. Can you elaborate a little bit on what ways he's impacting the game that we may not see when fans are basically just watching the ball?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a dirty position, man. It's an unselfish position. I mean, it's something where you're not going to make the glory stats like you were just saying. It's something where, hey, you're going to take on these double teams. You're going to, you're always going to have 2 hats on you. And look, you might not make the glory sack. You might not make that third down TFL, whatever it might be, but you're going to be stuff in that middle, and you're going to make sure that they kick it outside. And it's a very unselfish position. It's required. And I was always told for your defense and for your team, it always starts in the middle, from your running back, quarterback, center, nose guard, middle linebacker, and safety. You got to be sound there. And with Jacobian playing that role, it's an unselfish position, but it's one of the most important positions, because you might get 1 or 2, but your linebackers are flying around because you're taking those 2 guys on that offensive line.
Hey, when you watch this team, now that Gillery's out for the year, who are the guys that have stood out to you on the interior, or is it too small of a sample?
I mean, too small of a sample, but you know what? I do know, obviously, with Coach Bo Davis, I mean, he's going to have those guys ready to go. I mean, what he's been able to do with his coaching history, Alabama, Texas, and I know he's worked very well with, Pete Jenkins, and so the technique from that standpoint, he's going to have those guys ready. And I know they've had some transfers come in, and, they might be moving for defensive ends, some of those bigger guys inside to kind of help them out. But, time will tell. And, one thing I know is they have a great coaching staff, and I know they're going to have them ready to go.
You mentioned the defensive end. So Brian Kelly has talked about Paris Shand as one of those guys. So I'm curious, Christian, he's 6'4", 275, and he's an end. Yep. But we have seen him in certain packages kick inside. Like, how capable or able do you feel Shand is, considering, and by the way, he said yesterday, or earlier this week when he met with reporters, he said he knows every position. He can play nose, 3-tech, and he can play it all. He knows it all. He's a 5th-year guy right now. How capable do you think Shand is at his size to play that spot?
Yeah, I mean, he's definitely capable. Kind of one of those bigger defensive ends. I mean, if you were to slide him inside, you definitely see him in that 3-tech position. Kind of one of those guys that, not really that nose guard, but kind of on that guard. That's probably when you see a guy that's maybe not a 300-pounder, but a bigger defensive end that can slide in and, be that 275-pound three technique. If he can play nose, that's great. But you kind of want a bigger guy like Jacobian, 300, 310, that can sustain multiple double teams throughout the game compared to a three technique that maybe would get a one-on-one or can kind of shoot that gap and make that play. So he's definitely one of those guys that, just like you said, that small sample that you could probably put at that three technique and kind of get a good rotation there.
Christian LaCouture is our guest. Do you think, I want to reference 2014, and let me not speak, I want to get your perspective, because as I remember it, at the start of that season with the guys that left early, like, you were the most veteran defensive guy, and that was your sophomore year. And then Gottschall had to end up starting as a true freshman. Walk me through what you remember about the group y'all had that year and what it was like playing D-line that season.
Yeah, we were thin. But you know what? We had, Coach BREC Haley and John Chavis and Les Smiles. I mean, this is why you come to LSU. You come to play and be prepared. And you have to be prepared to play. When your number's called, you got to produce. And otherwise, it's next man up. So, when Gottschall was coming up, he was one of the guys that we told him, hey, you're going to have to play. And he came in and he grew and he got in that playbook and he understood what he needed to do. And when his time was called, we had an injury and he stepped up and he never looked back. And, for me, I was just trying to be that leader and I was trying to be a guy. Look, I knew I was a sophomore and it's my first year starting, but to your point, I had the most experience inside and I wanted to be that guy and bring everybody together and make sure that, hey, we're going to play sound defense, but we're also going to be communicating. I was always told communication breeds confidence, right? So if we're all on the same page, we're always right. So bringing those guys along, being the leader. But we had some guys, man, that had to step up, whether they're freshmen or sophomores, Greg Gilmore, Frank Aaron, those guys like that. So we had to make sure that even though we're sophomores or freshmen, we had to be ready to play.
What were the biggest challenges? Was it physical? Was it mental? Because, Christian, y'all had some good moments that year, but there was also, the Mississippi State game where a veteran Mississippi State team came in here and was just better. So, what were the biggest challenges from there that you think might correlate here?
Well, I wouldn't say it's so much physical. I think from the mental standpoint of the game, just understanding, look, you got to know your opponent. You got to study and you got to know what you see, and whether it's formations, but just as you kind of start, like you pointed to, that as the year went on, we started to be able to understand our identity and know who we were and getting together and studying and understanding our opponent. In the beginning, I think we were still trying to move people around and figure where everybody was at. I mean, Kendall Beckwith came along, became a starter that year.
Yep.
We were still trying to figure, I think, our identity out in the beginning of the year with our defense. But as we got towards the middle of the year, we really started finding that. But those first couple games, man, I think for us, it wasn't so much physical. I think it was more of gelling as a defense, and then also the mental standpoint of it is just being caught, especially with how young we are, and just getting some experience under our belt.
I'm so glad you said that, too. Christian LaCouture is our guest, former number 18, played at LSU, of course, coached on the 2019 National Championship staff. I'm so glad you brought that up, man, because it's like teams and defenses are allowed to improve as the season goes along, and sometimes you figure yourself out. So for this LSU defense now, there's going to be a lot of figuring out. I want to go back to something you said a bit ago where you got to be strong up the middle. I mean, it's true. That's true in baseball as well. We talk about all the time. Catcher, shortstop, second base, center field, right up the middle. So Brian Kelly kind of talked about this week, maybe moving Whit Weeks more to a full-time starter at Mike, moving Harold Perkins maybe to the star, the outside position. Do you have a feeling, I know I saw you in Vegas. I know you watch all the games. You're not there at practice every day, but what do you see when you watch this defense on the interior, especially there at linebacker?
Well, I'll tell you, number 40 is rolling.
Yeah.
He's everywhere. He's making plays. He's running sideline to sideline. And kind of like Jacobian, man, he's that dirt dog, man. He's going out there and scrapping and fighting for every inch. And you can just kind of see the excitement when he's out there, man, just the juice. And just, just him being the center of that defense, man. And really exciting to see a guy really stepping up. And I think, I've seen Coach Kelly really praising him as well. And just a small sample we've seen these last couple games. And him just, when he's out there, man, how stout that defense is. And really excited to see him obviously kind of take a bigger step and get more playing time and And look, they got stars everywhere. You still have, like you said, you still have number 7, Harold Perkins, and moving, outside to that star position. I mean, the small sample we saw in Vegas, I remember he came off the edge like guns blazing, and man, you couldn't stop him. The big TFL in the backfield, and man, he's so quick and dynamic. Coming off that outside position, and now you get a stout guy on the inside like Whit Weeks, and if we can get some gelling on that defensive line inside, man, I think that's kind of where you were talking about with us in 2014. These guys start getting that expansion of their belt at one position, play after play after play. Just really excited to see number 40 really take off and see what he does with it.
Yeah, your comparison with Kendall Beckwith that year was a good one because it really started to change when Beckwith got in there on the inside. All right, there's 2 more things I want to ask you. Number 1, I want to ask you about Dom McKinley. 6'6", 315, 5-star, number 1 player in Louisiana. Brian Kelly said he's got turf toe, but when he gets back, maybe a week or 2, they're going to ramp him up. What's realistic for a guy like that who's so big, but also so raw? What's realistic for him as this season goes along?
Man, if he can really look, the opportunity's there. If he can really kind of get his feet wet and obviously he's got the talent, right? He's he's number 1 player in the country, best defensive lineman in the country. He's got a great coaching staff. If he could just, that mental game, right? Get in that playbook, understand that, and then when he gets back healthy, man, if he can get in that rotation and kind of what Whit Weeks did, really, when he gets that small sample or whatever it is, make the most of it. But for him as a true freshman to come in and he can get in that rotation and prove his worth and make some really good plays. And I mean, a guy at that size, you're kind of talking about Shand earlier at 275, but now you got a guy that can probably play every position on that defensive line. He's quick enough to play defensive end. He's big enough to play 3 technique. And look, if we want to slide him inside on a pass rush situation as a nose guard, or even if we want to play, a 4-3 situation where he might be that shade, he can play all positions. And that's the biggest thing I was always taught is the more positions the quicker you get on the field. You don't just want to be a 3 technique because whenever that position comes open, okay, now I can play. But if you can play the 5, if you can play the 3, if you can play the shade, or if you can play 4-3 or 3-4 on those multiple defensive fronts, that's the quickest way you can get on the field. So if he can master that, he's got the size, the strength, and the talent. But if he can know all positions, then he'll get out there and he'll be in more playing time as the year goes on.
Last thing for you, man. Christian LaCouture, our guest, your time always appreciated. One of the things Brian Kelly said is they're not necessarily looking for any of these defensive linemen to go play 60, 65 reps, but maybe a handful of these guys to give you 12, 15, like max effort reps a game. Walk me through that, man. Like, as a defensive lineman, what situation would you rather be in? Would you rather be out there for 65 snaps a game, or would you rather have that healthy rotation where you're constantly changing the bodies, almost like a line change in hockey?
Man, it's crazy because it's like, as a player, dude, for me, there's 2 things. Like, when I was a player, I wanted to be out there as much as I can because I was getting in the rhythm of the game, right? You start feeling the type of game you're going into. Is it a running game, whatever? So the more plays, you kind of get in that rhythm compared to being in and out. But as a coach, when I was coaching, it was like, man, you want that line shift like hockey. Man, if you got 2 defensive lines that are just as good, get them in, get them out. That way they're fresh. And as the year goes on, man, especially going into SEC play, for me personally, I think it's from a coaching standpoint, if you can have 2 defensive lines where you can go in and they're just as good and rotate them out as the year goes on in SEC play, you want to have that because if something happens where somebody goes down, it's next man up and you have no problems because that guy's just going to be as good. But I think for me as a player, Matt, as the rhythm was going on in the game, I was preferring those 60 or 65 plays.
It's really a question. What hat are you wearing? Are you wearing coach or player Christian hat? But either way, we'll see how the Tigers can do this weekend over in Columbia, South Carolina. Christian LaCouture, great friend of the show, great former Tiger, man. Always appreciate you. Thanks, dude.
Thanks, Matt. Appreciate you, man.
Hey, thanks so much for watching. Please leave your comments. I love to interact, and be sure to hit the red subscribe button below.